Um, Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our panel. We made a great start to the event. In the morning, Tamam was quite bold about the evolution of the humanitarian system, but also the evolution of our world. We are indeed going through some very rapid, dynamic, unpredictable change in the world. And we know that the humanitarian system has to adapt, adjust, or change in ways it hasn't done up to now. So in this panel, we're going to talk about precisely that evolution. We have a long-standing history of humanitarian action, of the multilateral system. It's been 80 years since the UN system, and the humanitarian system is very much led by the multilateral. But in fact, humanitarian action itself goes way back. So in this panel, we will look at what that journey has looked like, because, in fact, we see that it has brought us to a place where we have a lot of positive developments that we can account for, but we also do know that it has needed to change and to transform over the years. Perhaps we feel it most urgently today. So we will have some discussions around what that evolution looks like and what the future of humanitarian action looks like. And I have a great panel today bringing in those very different perspectives, those who have been engaged in the formal humanitarian system, those who have engaged in the periphery, outside, but engaging with the formal humanitarian system. So we will hear from our panelists as to what this journey has looked like for them, and then also getting their thoughts and ideas of where it should be headed. So I would like to introduce my panel, but before that, shortly about myself. My name is Sema Karaosmanoğlu, and I'm the founder and director of Support to Life, Hayata Destek, a Turkey-based organization. My organization has been around for more than 20 years now, 21 to be precise, and I have been engaged in humanitarian, or engaging with the formal humanitarian sector for almost 30 years, 29 to be precise. And in the morning, when Chris asked us to think about how things have changed over these years, for me it has actually been quite a journey, because when I started in the mid-90s in Turkey, we had refugees from Bosnia and Kosovo, and there was the Balkan War, and it had already become protracted. And we were actually delivering cash assistance, cash and voucher assistance to refugees who were in Istanbul at the time. So I'm talking about 30 years ago. It has been quite a journey for me, because cash assistance, of course, then became formalized within the humanitarian system, and we talk about it more and more now. But as local and national organizations, we have been really able to adapt very quickly to that change, and very well connected with the realities on the ground. So for me, it's a privilege to be here. I was asked to moderate this panel. I have a lot to share myself, but of course, the rich discussion here is going to give us a broader perspective of where we stand. Okay, so for our panelists, Christoph, he is the Director of International Cooperation at the German Red Cross. Previously, Christoph held various positions within the German Red Cross and the International Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, not just in Germany, but also abroad. An economist by training, Christoph has also worked in public administration and served as senior advisor for disaster risk management to the State Council of the Chinese government in Beijing. I welcome Christoph, and thank you very much for hosting us today, Christoph. I will move on to Adelina Kamal. Adelina is the co-founder and steering committee member of the Southeast Asian Women Peace Mediators. Adelina has had strategic roles at the intersection of humanitarian action, conflict transformation, peace building, and regional leadership. She has been the executive director of the ASEAN Coordinating Center for Humanitarian Assistance, AHA Center, along with several other senior management positions at the ASEAN headquarters. And I have had the privilege of working with Adelina this past year. We are both members of an ODI NEAR advisory panel on the future of humanitarian action, and that's been a pleasure. Welcome, Adelina. And we have Arby with us. Arby is a humanitarian and development professional, and he's a founder of Aid Reimagined, which is a research and advocacy consultancy focused on aid, ethics, and justice. He has previously worked for humanitarian organizations across the spectrum, both international NGOs, the Red Cross, and UNICEF. Arby is currently a doctorate researcher at the London School of Economics, where he does refugee-focused political economy research. And I had the privilege to listen to Arby in numerous events and have been inspired by his thinking. So great to have you here on our panel today. We were actually supposed to have a fourth panelist. Michael Kortz could not make it today. He is from Global Support and Development Organization. It's a US-based humanitarian organization from California. And his organization works with philanthropies. So he engages very directly with the humanitarian system, but is not a part of it. So it would have been great to have his perspective on how things are evolving in the sector. Unfortunately, there were travel disruptions and he couldn't make it. But nevertheless, we have a smaller panel, but we will have more time to delve deeper, and we will have a rich discussion, nevertheless. Just before I hand over, perhaps briefly to set the frame. So we actually wanted to start with the positives of the humanitarian sector, because we can confidently say that the humanitarian system has in fact saved millions of lives. It has professionalized emergency response. It has created principles, standards, and a shared language of action. But we all know that the system is under immense pressure at the moment. But the question for us is not whether humanitarianism matters. We know it does, perhaps even more today than ever, as we are living through multiple and overlapping crises, conflicts that are more brutal, more protracted, and affecting civilians at an enormous scale. So what we will look at today is how the humanitarian system is going to evolve so that it better serves its purpose. And like I said, it's particularly important today because the world is also evolving, and the humanitarian system needs to evolve as well. We see that international cooperation is weakening, national interest is becoming more dominant, and we see fragmentation and more politicized aid and more polarity around the world like never before. So where does humanitarian action sit within this evolving, emerging world? This is what we are going to explore in our panels. And in terms of the structure of the conversation, we will have 2 rounds of questions for our panelists. One is what has the system achieved? So talking about the positive, where has it fallen short? And secondly, what needs to fundamentally be different, change for the humanitarian system to survive and to continue to add value to this new future that is unraveling. So I will start with you, Christophe, if I may. The Red Cross and Red Crescent movement has been at the heart of humanitarian action for over a century. From your perspective, having worked both within the movement and across different contexts, what are the achievements of the humanitarian system that we should be genuinely proud of? And where do you see its shortcomings from where you stand?
Okay, thank you very much, Sema, and good morning from my side. I think, Sema, you mentioned already the major achievement. I mean, humanitarian workers saved millions of lives. And humanitarian workers gave millions of people a minimum of dignity, gave millions of people a choice. And we often forget that in being very critical of ourselves. So I think over the past decades, humanitarian action grew normatively and practically quite substantially. But I would like to do a little detour and talk about the humanitarian system that has been mentioned already this morning a couple of times. I don't believe in that. The system suggests certain order, it suggests hierarchy, it suggests clarity, and you can find elements of that in particular hierarchy or power structure, but this doesn't do justice to the situations humanitarian workers and humanitarian organizations have to deal with. These are situations of chaos and sometimes despair. And I would like to go back, and it was mentioned already this morning in the opening dialogue, the World Humanitarian Summit 10 years ago in Istanbul, 2016. And at that time, the German Federal Foreign Office promoted what they called an ecosystem approach. And that was an approach that allowed for more diversity, for more flexibility. And the idea was that to have a system that is somewhat fluid, that is flexible, and that is adaptive, or in short, a system that is more resilient. I think, in fact, we do have a number of systems already. Systems that interact, that exchange, and that in the best moments or best situations complement each other. And I think complementing and complementarity is a very crucial word in the discussion we have. This is not the time to go into detail, but I would like to give 2 examples. One example was already mentioned this morning, again in the opening dialogue, the emergency response rooms in Sudan. Not part of the system as it is often presented. And the other one is really the variety and the scope of mutual aid initiatives in Ukraine. A very, very significant part of humanitarian assistance in Ukraine is provided through these mutual aid initiatives. Both do not necessarily fit in the humanitarian system, but they are pivotal for the survival of people in both contexts. So complementarity is something I would like to highlight. However, we are very bad by purpose or by ignorance in displaying these successes, and I think that is a weakness of all of us, that we usually are not very strong in showing our successes, but very strong in showing our weaknesses. So in many of the achievements, we often, or almost always, we project the image of a very monolithic structure. A structure that is designed for efficiency and very often neglecting effectiveness. And I think effectiveness is a very, very important thing in humanitarian action. In dealing with shocks, with chaos, with horror, we very often pretended to be a machine, a machinery, a well-functioning machinery, instead of being a living ecosystem. And I think we are much more of that ecosystem, that living thing, that fluid, flexible thing than we admit. In the teaser for our session here, reforms and achievements are mentioned in coordination, in accountability, in professional standards. And all these three are linked. I mean, you can't distinct coordination from accountability or professional standards. So just to name a few, because we are talking about achievements from the past decades. I mean, one is bit more than 1 decade, 32 years. It's the Code of Conduct for the International Red Cross Red Crescent Movement and NGOs in disaster relief. But then as well in the 90s, the Sphere Handbook. Then in the 2000s, the Core Humanitarian Standard on Quality and Accountability. Professional standards for protection work. And more recently, the Climate and Environment Charter for humanitarian organizations. I mean, there are more. But I think we often take them as granted, but in fact they were and are very groundbreaking achievements. You, Sema, you mentioned in the beginning, you did cash and voucher assistance or cash-based assistance probably in the 1990s already. But I mean, many of us will remember how much that was contested, how much this was criticized. By now, I mean, we have achieved quite a lot. And coming to an end, on a personal note, for me personally, the advances we have made in disaster risk reduction and in anticipatory humanitarian action are, this is very personal, are maybe the biggest achievement, because they have a lot to do, something with efficiency, but they have a lot to do with dignity, with putting people at the center. I mean, not waiting until something has happened, but really acting early. So, to be clear, I do not want to paint a rose-tinted and idealized picture, but to be honest, I'm a bit tired of our collective tendency to jump through every loop dangled in front of us. So, that maybe as a starter.
Lovely, thank you very much, Christoph. Yes, I do remember during the World Humanitarian Summit, the German government was very keen on an ecosystems approach to the humanitarian sector, as we were talking about improving effectiveness, efficiency, accountability of the system. So there are certain concepts I think we tend to discuss around some concepts which give us an idea of where the system is going or needs to go. So we'll be talking a bit more about that. On to you, Adelina. You bring a very important perspective that connects humanitarian action with diplomacy and regional cooperation. From your experience in Southeast Asia, the wider Asia Pacific and beyond, particularly in ASEAN and regional crisis governance, where has the humanitarian system succeeded in building meaningful partnerships with states and regional actors? And where do you still see tensions, especially between the regional mechanisms and the multilateral system as it currently stands?
Thank you very much, Sema, and good to be here. First time in the Humanitarian Congress, but not first time in Berlin. It was 20 years ago I was in Berlin, and I have seen, since yesterday, it has changed a lot. My name is Adelina Kamal again. I'm from Indonesia, born and bred Indonesia, and still work in the so-called Global South, Southeast Asia to be Pacific. I used to be a disaster manager As you know, probably Indonesia is one of those countries, together with the Philippines, considered as the 7-Eleven or supermarket of natural, in quotation mark, natural disasters. So I used to be a disaster manager and also humanitarian. But now I work in peace building, peace mediation. When I was listening this morning to the speech of Tamam as well as the discussion, I noticed that there was this one particular time in the history, in the system's history, in our humankind history, that was not mentioned. And that, I'm talking about the Indian Ocean tsunami in 2004. If you remember, the Indian Ocean tsunami, it struck Aceh, province of Indonesia, and North Sumatra. It also hit Thailand, Malaysia, Myanmar, as well as surrounding countries. And the waves actually also hit all the way to Africa. 8,000 kilometers from the epicenter. And it killed thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in less than 30 minutes. The wave reached up to 3 meters, the largest disaster in the past 100 years. And the biggest military operation other than war after the World War II. The UN Secretary General at that time, Kofi Annan, said that it was unprecedented. A global catastrophe for the UN is also the largest natural disaster the organization has had to respond after 60 years of existence. So that, I think, should be remembered, because that also not only a milestone for the UN and for the world, but also for ASEAN. Months before the Indian Ocean tsunami, I was tasked by the Secretary General of ASEAN at that time to draft a regional treaty known as the Disaster Management and Emergency Response Agreement. Of course, Philippines already suffered from landslide, Indonesia earthquake, but not as major as the Indian Ocean tsunami. And the tsunami hit. So for us, it was also a monumental moment for ASEAN, for the region, because it was also the first time when we had to reinvent ourselves and had to situate where we are in the system. I would say that ASEAN has never been at the periphery, because at that time also, while it was the largest emergency operation in the world, the UN and the international community would have not been able to work, at least in my country, if the government at that time didn't decide that they would welcome international assistance. And the government, the president at that time, decided that it would be open sky policy, meaning that you could come in. But what we witnessed afterwards was the second wave of tsunami, because there's waves of international assistance coming in. But it was because of the leadership of the government. We had a man that basically led the coordination, particularly in terms of recovery, that it was not too overwhelming. Well, it was overwhelming, but the government and the national and local government didn't become just the recipient. And I think it was important because for us, the way I see it now, and also in ASEAN, the question as well, I have a little bit problem with the question. It's as if that the system has given us something, as if that the system, not only the dominant, but also the one that is giving, oh, here we are, we come, yeah, with all the systems and the principles and the wisdom. You receive. That's a very colonial way. I'm not against the question, yeah, but that's a very colonial way of interpreting what the system is. Well, in my part of the region, the international system, at least now, has never been at the center of gravity. It was never the center of gravity. We talk about complementary, yes. So that's what I actually saw in 2004, 2005, after the Indian Ocean tsunami. Indonesia and Aceh would have never recovered in 4 years if it was not because of the international goodwill. That's true. But the role of the national government, the local civil society, and the international civil society also important, as important. But we have never been the center of gravity. It's not the question of or, it is a matter of and. So that's number one. Now, let's talk about complementarity. In the case of ASEAN, we have grown in the past 20 years or so from competition to coexistence to collaboration. So it is not always easy. There's a push and pull, yeah, and there's a constant negotiation. But I guess from a regional organization perspective, mind you, I'm no longer with ASEAN. Yeah, I'm no longer in position, but I can talk about it because I was in the system for 30 years, ASEAN system. But when we talk about complementarity, it requires the parties involved to have same or similar leverage. For a regional organization, we have 10 governments behind us and the dialogue partners. So when it comes to moving ASEAN and UN, or ASEAN and the international system, moving from competition to coexistence to collaboration, that was because we have people supporting us. Yeah, at the back. It is not only the executive director of AHA Center, right? Talking to the UN OCHA or the Secretary General of ASEAN talking to the UN Secretary General. No, there are actually 10 governments behind us. Now, you compare that to local actors. They don't have that leverage. So for us, I think that we are able to move toward collaboration from competition because we know how to play our part, but we also know our strengths and our comparative advantages. I would say if I were with a local NGO, probably it would be much harder for me to push toward that collaboration mechanism. Second, as I mentioned as well, I think it is also important to understand that, as I mentioned earlier, it requires both ends to push and to pull to shape the partnership. And it also depends on the other end to push that, no, you're not the weak guys, or you are not the receiving end. And to basically change the narratives and change the dominant. And I think when it comes to ASEAN, I guess also because of the direction of the government and also the way we work and also our history of colonization, we tend to push back. We tend to push back toward any form of Western dominance or colonization. Yeah, because we have our own history and narrative. And there, I think what happened to the story of ASEAN and UN working together in the past 20 or 30 years.
Great, thank you very much, Adelina. Indeed, Indonesia is a good example of how the government and its civil society has stepped up with disasters and has found ways of collaborating with the multilateral system with its various actors. So thank you for those notes. Arby, I turn to you. Your work takes a more critical lens on the system, especially around power, ethics, and justice. From that perspective, what are the achievements we should still hold on to and defend, and which parts of the system are simply no longer fit for purpose?
Thank you for that question, and I'm very happy to be here. I'm going to give you 3 things. So the first one that I think we should hold on to is that I like that our sector has set the standard for humanitarian assistance. We have reams and reams of pages of technical standards. We have elaborate systems around accountability and protection. But sometimes these technical standards manifest in unnecessary bureaucracy. And I'm also going to quote the anthropologist David Graeber that Tamam quoted earlier, what he calls, and pardon my French, bullshit jobs. And I think, what he means by bullshit jobs is not the menial jobs that are actually essential in society, like being a cleaner, for example. But what he means are the middle managers who do not add substantive value to what we're doing. And I think we need to ask ourselves, how much unnecessary bureaucracy and bullshit jobs are there in the sector? And I think it is a difficult conversation to have, especially amidst funding cuts and redundancies, but it is a necessary conversation. There are people in our sector who say, we should go back to the basics. I actually vehemently disagree with that notion, partly because a lot of Global South actors, people and communities themselves, want more than the basics. They want the root causes of their problems to be tackled. But I understand this clamor for returning to the basics when we look at our system that is overly complex. The second thing that I like about our sector and I want to preserve is our ambition. We want to localize, we want to decolonize aid, and that's great. But we have these big, lofty ideals, but we can't get the small things right. I once worked with an international NGO who publicly professed, we want to decolonize, and then they can't pay my invoice on time. One thing that the sector is always doing that is small is that we keep on lying. I think earlier, in the speeches earlier, it was referenced that, the truth has been distorted. And we are also guilty of that. We lie in our marketing when we say, give £5 and you will lift this family up out of poverty. We lie in our reports when our projects fail and we somehow manage to reframe it as, it's a learning pilot. There was a big INGO that professed recently saying, we're not going to take any more money from the UN pooled funds. And then it was revealed last year that they've taken tens of millions of dollars from UN pooled funds. Change starts with the truth, and if we cannot be truthful, and we cannot be honest with ourselves, and we continue to lie, we cannot achieve change. And then the final thing that I think I want to preserve, ultimately, is international cooperation. I've said it elsewhere, but I believe that altruism is innately human. When people see other people suffering, we would want to help. But of course, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and sometimes our wanting to help doesn't always translate, and we do more harm than good. But there are forces within our society, especially far-right forces, who take advantage of this weakness and say, we shouldn't have international cooperation anymore. Let's just dismantle, these agencies. Let's dismantle USAID. Let's cut funding. Charity begins at home. And I disagree with that. What we need is a new narrative to fight back. What we need is a new political community that can come together and agree that international cooperation is an ideal, is something valuable, and is something worth fighting for. And how to do that is if we can create a political community where we can convince each other that our struggles are interconnected. It's not about charity or giving to the other, but it's about realizing that, for example, when a farmer in the Philippines gets hit by a disaster, that affects the food supply chain all over the world. When there is war in one place, it can spread to another, and it has implications on migration. So I think that's really important, to fight against these far right-wing forces, and to be able to build a political community where international cooperation is not about charity, it's not about foreign policy tool, but it's about our security and well-being connected with each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arby. It does resonate with me when you said that the humanitarian system has brought certain standards and principles, and me, coming from a national NGO, being a partner within the system has taught us a lot in terms of how we streamline some of the work we do, and it's provided us a guiding star of what we should strive for. But it does also bring a lot of bureaucracy, for sure. We've had international partners who've had compliance officers coming in who were like, "What, compliance officers?" Because there was so much compliance around the work we were doing. So there were times when we felt like there were redundant jobs, definitely within the sector. Great, thank you for that. Now, in terms of the second round, for our discussion. So we did take stock of what has gone well and not so well, but where is this going? Where is it all going? And we said, as the world evolves, the humanitarian system, humanitarian action is also evolving. So let's talk a bit about that. It is evolving, we say, or it should evolve wherever you stand. Within that statement, we will see what that looks like. So, Adelina, I come back to you. You and I, we've been part of the ODI NEAR Advisory Panel, which recently put forward the idea, much to your credit, thanks for that, of a humanitarian system moving from ego systems to ecosystems. Could you unpack this for us? What does this shift mean, and what does it look like?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sema. So first of all, I don't think that the so-called dominant system is all bullshit. It's all bullshit. They are good things, but it is to the point, to a certain point, it becomes too much of a good thing. Yeah, so there are good things, but there are also bad things. That's number one. Our advisory panel on the future of humanitarian action came up with a vision paper, and it is called Moving Away from the Ecosystem, ego, yeah, to ecosystems with plural, yeah. And this is not a new thing, right? The ecosystem, but we really elevate the word ego, because what has happened so far is a theater of people with egos, yeah, institution with egos, power, not only money, but also power. So moving away from ecosystem to ecosystem, that's the title of our vision paper. And that actually comes from our realization, our observation, and also our conviction that when it comes to humanitarianism, it is not only one form of humanitarianism, there are plural forms of humanitarianisms. Like in the case of my country, the strongest humanitarian legitimacy is rooted in the long-standing community systems. And we have one word, gotong royong, in Bahasa Indonesia. It means sharing the burden together and helping one another. And that notion of gotong royong even is older than the country itself, is older than Indonesia itself. And that we see gotong royong in COVID, in the recent flooding in Aceh. Not so much the dominant system, no. It is the gotong royong from the community. So there's always plural forms of humanitarianisms. We just don't realize it. Yeah. If you stand from Geneva or New York, you don't see that. Unless you go to the field, then you will see what actually is the dominant, yeah? The center of gravity, and the one that really provide aid to the community. The other thing that the other observation that we have, apart from plural forms of humanitarianism, is the realization, our analysis that what we are suffering right now is not only the legitimacy of funding crisis, but also legitimacy in terms of our moral principles, and and we decided to reintroduce the idea of justice and equity. If you want to change or we want to move away from ecosystem to ecosystem, then we have to put justice and equity as the North Star, or not North Star, as the guiding star, right? And put that into actions. So that basically the foundation of our vision paper, from ecosystem to ecosystems. That's it.
That's in a nutshell. Thank you very much, Adelina. Arby, building on that, if we take seriously the need for transformation, what would a more just and legitimate humanitarian system actually look like? What shift would need to be fundamentally made, in your opinion?
I think, first of all, we need to democratize the humanitarian system. We talk about humanitarian system, it's actually really more like the humanitarian empire. And I think when we're talking about localization and decolonization and shifting the power, ultimately, what we were trying to do is to democratize the humanitarian system. What do I mean by this? We have to democratize this at the top, in the middle, and at the bottom. At the top, look at how we select leaders. We've already allocated the leadership of certain UN agencies to certain nationalities. That's not democratic. In the middle, this is where the bulk of localization and shifting the power comes from, right? We all know that organizations are not led by the people and communities that they serve. There's a study by the Center for Global Development which looks at a sample of international NGOs, and they found that only 2% of these sampled NGOs have in their board people who are from refugee backgrounds or from people who are from communities impacted by crises. So that's wrong. But I think most importantly, but most neglectedly, we have to democratize from the bottom. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the people, the voting public, mostly in the global north, but also in the global south. People do not have any idea about aid or how aid works. I guarantee you that if you go out in the street today and ask someone, how much of the taxpayers' money do you think goes to aid? They will give a wildly inaccurate answer. And so no wonder people are skeptical about aid. People do not understand it. And so I think we need to bring along with us the people in the global north, but also in the global south. In the global south, there's a lot of disinformation and misinformation about aid. And so I think we need to bring them along to the journey and really give them the agency and empowerment in making decisions around aid. And just to give you an example, elsewhere I've written about, for example, citizens' assemblies around aid. Why aren't we doing that? I think really giving the people the say and the participation. We talk about participation in aid a lot, but our own publics do not get to participate in how we make decisions around aid. The second thing is, and I think we've heard this today already, is to restore the polyculture of humanitarianism. We've monocropped humanitarian assistance. We've become the McDonald's of humanitarian assistance. Most international NGOs look the same. They do the same things. And yet, we know that the solution to our problems cannot come from the humanitarian sector alone. With due respect to the OCHA representative earlier today who said that they have comparative advantage, I disagree. I mean, he's already professed the shortcomings of the UN. How can you say that you have comparative advantage in humanitarianism? There's so many more other entities beyond the formal humanitarian sector who can deliver aid better. And I'm talking about, we've discussed earlier, mutual aid groups and self-help groups, social movements, and yes, even markets, and sometimes the private sector, although that's a long debate that we can have later on. I'm going to give you one example. In the Philippines, one of the best humanitarian responders at the moment there is an organization called Angat Buhay. And Angat Buhay was established by a progressive politician, the former Vice President Leni Robredo. During elections, there was a lot of volunteers all over the country who wanted to volunteer to campaign for Leni Robredo. After the elections, Leni's team said, what do we do with this, these groups of people who have campaigned and given their time and energy to fight for our causes? They just didn't want them to fade away. So what they did was to help these groups turn from campaign volunteers to community-based organizations. They've given them resources and they've given them training. And now, because they're all over the country and they're embedded within communities, they're one of the fastest responders whenever disaster strikes. And this totally is outside of the humanitarian playbook. This is a political organization, right? And what's more is that these groups, they have political sensitivity. They are aware of the causes of their vulnerabilities that goes beyond short-term humanitarianism. For example, corruption. So I think this gives us a new way of thinking about who we can bring in our so-called humanitarian sector. And finally, a more just and legitimate aid system requires the people in it to be brave. And we often in the humanitarian sector, and I count myself in this, often we are cowards. We fear change and we fear uncertainty. And yet, the people who seek to dismantle the architecture of international cooperation, they're not afraid. They say, actually, screw it, I'm gonna dismantle USAID. Or actually, screw it, we're not gonna do that anymore. And yet, us, we're always afraid. And so we default to how things have been done. We default to preservation of our organizational mandates and our jobs. But if we really want to change, we have to be brave. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arby, for those interesting comments. Christoph, coming to you. Large institutions like the Red Cross have shaped the system as we know it. How can these institutions evolve in a changing world while still protecting the humanitarian principles that define them?
I think for the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement to start looking a little bit inwards is, I think we had to really rediscover who we really are. And I mean, the way you talk about the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, it looks, again, like this very big international thing. But what the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement was by origin and still is something very, very local, something very, very decentralized. And maybe I'm using complementarity a bit too often, but I think that is one of the strengths. And I would like to refer to Arbi talking about international cooperation. I think that is super, super important. International cooperation and all what we see in the political sphere, all the pushes to dismantle international cooperation. I think international cooperation can happen or has to happen on many different levels. But I think it's very, very fundamental that it is rooted really with people, with communities, and that people have an understanding of that. And I think that is very much at the heart of the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement. We forgot about that because we saw Geneva Conventions, the International Committee of the Red Cross with a super relevant and important mandate, but we forgot for some time about all that is happening locally. And I think, I agree with Arbi saying if you walk on the streets and you ask people how much money is spent on humanitarian assistance, most people wouldn't know. But I think this may be a bit German specific. But if in Germany, I think what we are not using, I think most people in Germany have in their very daily life some exposure to organizations like Caritas, what is the Catholic Church, Diaconia, the Lutheran Church, Workers' Welfare, Arbeiterwohlfahrt, the Red Cross, in providing daily services, but being the very first responders in any emergency as well. And I think for Germany, we often missed and still miss the opportunity to say, and this is exactly what the colleagues in the Philippines, whatever organization it is, in Indonesia, wherever, are doing, that there is something very, very much in common. And I think there is this sense of solidarity amongst people. And I think talking about what we have to change, I think we have to strengthen the narrative really, and again, starting with my own organization or movement, to focus on that. Then I think we were far too often in the past ready to compensate for failures of other actors, of other political fields. I think the huge budget growth in the 2010s, at least in the humanitarian budgets in the north, in the traditional donor countries, was partly linked to the withdrawal of development actors from a lot of crisis situations. And as humanitarians, we were all too often, all too happy to pick on the money. And Abi, you said you very much disagree with the back to basics. And I think there's something in it, because back to basics, I would define as really focusing on what is humanitarian work, but at the same time, leaving it up to people on the ground to define what they need. The question is really, do we project that as core humanitarian work that has to be funded by, let's say, through the traditional system? And I think that is the conversation we have to have. But I honestly think we have done things we shouldn't have done, have taken money, too much money we shouldn't have taken. And then we compensated all too many times too easily for the lack of political action. And I mean, it was very much related to money. Okay, we don't find a political solution. There is no political will for that. Okay, another budget, and we all jumped on that. So that is, I think, the things we have to change. And at the very bottom is really, I think, humanitarian action. The international dimension is something relatively new. I mean, that is, you mentioned UN 80. I mean, it was existing before. There were elements of that with some NGOs, some Save the Children, Oxfams, others, with the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement. But, I mean, humanitarian assistance and humanitarian actions is much, much older than these structures. And I think that is something we have to put back at the center again and look into ways how we can do that. And this is, again, the emergency response rooms are a good example, the mutual aid initiatives in in Ukraine are a very good example. So that is the way forward from my perspective.
Great, thank you very much, Christoph, and to all our panelists. It's been a very, very rich discussion. Just quickly to reflect from my side, we did talk about some of the self-help culture and initiatives that are already in place in the various contexts. In Turkey, we also have a word, imece, we call it, which means communities helping each other at times of need. So it's interesting that we do have these cultures, ways of working, communities already being active, and they're not passive recipients, right? As the humanitarian system have seen them. So as we talk about moving away from this one dominant humanitarian system and tapping into what's already there. So again, linking to the ecosystems idea of multiple humanitarianisms, perhaps, as we say. And of course, this ties in very well with the democracy argument, Arbi, that you have brought up. It's a matter of governance. It's a matter of acknowledging where everyone stands and that they're there for us to acknowledge them and to make them a part of the greater movement, the development that we're all trying to put together. And in that sense, moving away from the monoculture metaphor, I also like that a lot because the dominant humanitarian system has actually told us for decades now that there's only one way of doing things, and we've really found ourselves very caught in that system. So as local and national organizations, we're also trying to see where we can challenge the way things have traditionally been done, and oftentimes we felt very stuck in the ways of working of the humanitarian system. And as Nadine said this morning, we didn't think we would be up here talking about these issues when I went into humanitarian work, but our roles have evolved as well. So we're not only service delivery agents, as we have traditionally been seen within the humanitarian system, but we actually have agency, and we talk about how policies need to look different, how practice needs to look different. So I think we've also stepped up as actors within the system. We weren't always visible, but we are now. So being brave, Arbi, thanks again for that. I really feel that for me personally, it's taken courage for me to talk about the shortcomings of the humanitarian system and how it needs to change and how we can create alternatives. We do talk a lot about alternatives now within the humanitarian system because the tools, the ways of working, the mechanisms we have is just simply insufficient to ensure that inclusiveness, that dynamic and more networked ecosystem that we want to see. So it has been all very inspiring. Thank you very much for that. Maybe just to conclude, I feel that the real discussion evolves around not how we fix what we have, but how we let new ones emerge. And as actors active within the system, all of us, if we don't change with it, are we going to be able to survive as we are? So for us also to look internally at where we stand and how our roles are also changing. So thank you to my panelists for the discussion. We have about 15 minutes left to our panel. So I would like to open it up for anyone who might have questions or comments to our panelists. Yes, please. Here in the front.
Thank you, first of all, for the panel. I have a question to Adelina. One thing which stuck with me from the morning was something Nadine said, and I think it's very true to say for local organizations, it's a bit like for women to get into jobs and prove them even more than those who have been there. And you have mentioned as well the dominant humanitarian setups we have. And I'm wondering, because you didn't talk so much about that you are part of Asian women peace mediators. So there is this word in it as well, right? So I'm wondering, how difficult is it as a group which has, representing women in an area who are already fighting to get as local groups in a system and then as women local groups in a dominant. And let's be honest, humanitarian aid from the Western world was, at least in starting, very male-dominated. Might be changing a little bit. We're not there yet. But I'm wondering how much is there a double struggle of a local organization and women, female-led, to be to getting space in this humanitarian.
Should I respond to that?
And the ecosystem, especially from the ecosystem. Yeah.
Shall I go now?
Yes, go ahead.
Thanks for really insightful comments from the panel. I was struck by Adelina's point about leverage. So I wanted to ask a question to the panel as we look ahead to the next 10 years or so, if you could comment on what you see as the influence of China on this conversation, because when Abi made this point around the narrative of international solidarity and seeing the need to collaborate to tackle problems, I think we have a competing narrative emerging of anti-interventionist, and I'm just wondering how the panel would consider China's influence on the conversation. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Yes.
Hello, my name is Alyosha Meyer. I'm kind of like an early career disaster risk manager. What you spoke about on the panel regarding local organizations, so you mentioned the groups in Sudan, for example, really struck with me. And I think that's something we always see in disasters, that like the people on the ground are the first one responding, and they already know pretty well what's going on there. And even though we speak about participation a lot, I'm not even sure if participation is the right word, because the people on the ground, the communities, they don't participate in our response, but we maybe at least participate in their response. So I really often ask myself, how do we come to a sort of like mindset change to really empower the people and really center them? And I think, like, I did research on the earthquake in Turkey, and international and national actors, likewise, were super surprised that people from the communities actually did something. And I think that's a big problem, that we always act as surprised, because the people are very, very capable of helping themselves, and they need support in that.
Great, thank you very much. So we have 3 questions. Whoever wants to start, go ahead, Anne.
Thank you very much for the question. We were born out of a brilliant idea of a woman. So it's really the story of a woman helping or woman inspiring other women. So it was the only so far female foreign minister of Indonesia, the previous one of Indonesia, who came to conferences organized in the global north. And she saw that there's so many peace mediators, peace negotiators forming together, coming together to form a group. Why not from Southeast Asia? So her name is Retno Marsudi. She's now the UN Secretary General's Envoy on Water, but she was the Foreign Minister of Indonesia for 10 years. So she conceived us. We are a group of 8 women. Not all actually have experience in peace building. I myself, I'm a humanitarian. Happen to be the first woman heading the ASEAN Humanitarian Assistance Center, so far the only. But I have other more prominent colleagues in my group. I have the first woman in the world that led the negotiation of the Bangsa Moro Agreement on behalf of the government, and the one that signed the peace agreement with the armed group, that is Moro. And then I have another colleague who used to be a political refugee because she had to flee to US, when Aceh experienced conflict. She was the only woman supporting the political negotiation between the Free Aceh movement and the government of Indonesia. I have another colleague from Timor-Leste who used to be part of the resistance movement on the ground and now very prominent in terms of building the National Action Plan. I have another colleague from Malaysia who has been known for her work on refugees from Myanmar, who is now also in exile because she was part of, she is now part of the anti-junta movement. There are 8 of us. I cannot mention one by one right now. So the challenges, I guess, again, we have the privilege of experience. We come from, not necessarily coming from local organizations. Some of us actually have a local organizational background. But I guess it was because of the foreign minister of Indonesia back then that conceived us and basically got us together. And we become, I think it's not only a group that organize meetings, no. We actually are deeply involved in the conflict transformation in our region as well as beyond. So we're involved on the ground. I just left Timor-Leste 2 weeks ago, where I brought online a young person from Myanmar, talking to the youth from Timor-Leste, as my group is part of the the bottom-up reconciliation effort in Timor-Leste, complementing the government state-led reconciliation effort. But we also talk to governments, we talk to ambassadors, we talk to ministers. The way I say it, we should not define ourselves being local. Because right now, nowadays, nobody is local anymore. Everybody is global. We are exposed with, all this technology. So I think we need to break down that stereotype that we are local. No, I work on the ground, but I also talk to the Prime Minister and President of Timor-Leste and other, not to boost myself, but for us to effect change, we should be able to talk to anyone using our experience. So that's number one. Now, there was this issue about Sudan, right? You mentioned about Sudan. I would also mention about Myanmar. And you mentioned about how can we center the people, right? Recenter the people. No, they are doing it themselves. They're doing it themselves. Okay, 10 minutes. They're doing it themselves. I'm so much inspired by the young people of Myanmar. They are undergoing a revolution right now, not only against the junta, but against the patriarchal nature of the society. I mean, compared to the revolutions of the past, this one is strongest. It's a horizontal movement of movements when the young actually led the anti-junta demonstration. So they're claiming the spot themselves. We should help them, not because we want to help them, right? Not because we want to help them, as a giver. No, they have to be the one telling us how we help them. That's the way I see it. On China influence, the leverage. So I have some problem with complementarity. I think we have to understand what that means. In the past, in early 2000, when ASEAN and UN started working together more closely, my part always feel that when it comes to international system, not only UN, they can offer aggregate knowledge, principles and norms, and global experiences. Now, can we actually work on those 3 elements nowadays? No, because everybody has global experience already. I know the founder of Mercy Malaysia, Dr. Jamilah Mahmud, who actually, this is kind of like peculiar. It's a Global South NGO, but they actually went to Middle East first. They went out first. They become global, right? So they have global experience. Aggregate knowledge, we have aggregate knowledge, no? Because of technology coming to this kind of conference. Now the things that probably we can count on the international system are the principles and the norms, right? Because we have, the International Court of Justice, ICC, everything, the humanitarian principles and all that. But see what we are now. Look at where we are now. Those norms and principles are falling apart. So I think we need to redefine this, what complementarity means, between local, national, and global. Perhaps it has to be different. Perhaps it is not complementarity, but, it's the other word. I don't know how it is. But I think we should, first of all, break down the stereotype of local only working at the local level. No. And I'm the one that will say, no, I'm local, I'm national, well, I'm local, I'm regional, but I also work at the global level, and vice versa. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Adelina, anyone else would like to have the word? Maybe on the Sudan case with the emergency response rooms and participation, that distinction between community-led, locally led, and participation. Perhaps that would be interesting.
Sure, yeah. No, thanks so much for the questions. Yeah, in terms of what you said, this is why somebody said, there's no need to kind of like localize because the locals are already doing the work. So actually what needs to localize is the international sector. And I think there's kind of like two kinds of localization from my perspective. It's localizing the sector in the sense that you're transforming the branches of international NGOs as local organizations, but still the decision-making comes from the top. Or you're actually genuinely supporting local solutions, whether it comes from NGOs, community groups, volunteer groups, social movements, etc. And so I think we need to be clear about that localization means genuinely supporting local solutions, not just localizing the sector. And like just very briefly on China, I think 4 reactions to it. Number one is that this narrative that China somehow is this other counterforce. Yes, there's some truth to it, but also that narrative is coming from a certain place, i.e. from the West. And so I think there are interests around this narrative that they're supposed to be this other nefarious kind of like entity that we should be wary of. I think the second is, the falling apart of the rules-based order. And now China's stepping into the vacuum. I don't know if people have seen Mark Carney speak at the World Economic Forum about how the rules-based order, the pretense of it, has disappeared. And that's a lot of what the Global South people have been saying for years. And now suddenly he's saying it, it must be true. And I think, China is not a monolith. It's composed of very different, a very big bureaucracy with different interests as well. So I think we should also be wary about that narrative that there is this singular interest from China. And last point is that China has influence because a lot of countries do not have economic and political sovereignty. And I think about my country, for example, Philippines, where we are in conflict with China over certain things, and we need assistance from other countries because we do not have political economic sovereignty. And this speaks to the point of the solutions go beyond the humanitarian sector. The solution is political, is long-term, and it is about, in many ways, the sovereignty of these countries.
Thank you very much, Arby. And Christoph, maybe on China?
Yeah, me talking on China is a bit with a bias, but what I think is, and I would agree with what Arby said, I think what is important to realize, I think time plays a different role for Chinese politics, and I think we see already a lot of Chinese initiatives happening, and I think what's very often done is that certain things are tried, then are evaluated, and I think there will be a point in time when we will see Chinese engagement very big. What form it will take, I don't know, but I think it's a lot of testing and evaluating at the moment. I think what is very important is it's not at all, although it appears sometimes so monolithic. I mean, there's a lot of different powers and inside the country. But I would like to complement one thing on local. And coming back to the Sudan question in a way, I mean, we in German Red Cross, we often in the past said, so we respond to a drought in wherever. And I think we have really changed that in a sense by saying the Colombian Red Cross is responding to, and we are doing this and that to facilitate that response and so on and so forth. And I think that is, you can say it's only language, but I think it's going far beyond language. It's going far beyond external communication. It is something about really the way we think, and the way we try to work is that we say and let's stick with Colombia, and that case now could apply for Sudan as well. So it's the Colombian Red Cross with a certain mandate, with an assigned role in country, and our role as German Red Cross is to support the colleagues there on the ground, to feed into their plan, a strategic plan, an operational plan, and not come up with our own programs. They know, and I mean, they are on the ground, and it's exactly like in Sudan, it's like in the Philippines, people are responding, and we don't have to tell them do something now. And to close with, when US aid was dismantled last year, I heard a couple of times, and I tried to be very positive and talk a lot about achievements, but what I found really, really not only disturbing, but very frustrating. USAID was dismantled, and I heard from many organizations saying, okay, now, within 1 month, our local partner that we've worked with for 20 years, 30 years, will cease to exist. What kind of partnership has this been? If someone in Washington pulls a plug, an organization that has worked in any country stops just because the middleman, and I think here the middleman is really the right word, didn't do what they should have done for decades and really invest in structure. So I think what is very, very crucial is to not see people on the ground as implementers, but they are there and they have a mandate, they have a role to play, and what we should do first and foremost is to enable them, and that includes always investing into structures and allowing them to be sustainable to a certain extent.
Great, thank you very much, Christoph. So it is about building our resilience as the local, global community, for sure. I would like to thank our panelists for this great discussion, and I hope you have been inspired by this panel and some of the ideas put forth. So thank you very much for being in here.